It's Lucy of Lucy V Makes and welcome to part 2 of the cushion project. Here I'm going to show you how I made this from the patch that we made in part 1. So I've got everything here that I need in order to make my cushion. Cushion pad, fabric, tape measure, scissors, my patch, pins and my braid and tassels. I've also got some tailors chalk and sort of general sewing odds and ends and my sewing machine. The first thing that I did is actually measure my cushion. It says 16 inches on the label, but I wasn't quite sure what that meant, whether it was the diagonal, sort of the puffed up size or whatever. It turns out that actually 16 inches is from the side seam to side seam. So that means the fabric piece itself is 16 inches square, which makes it very easy for cutting out because I just need to cut out something that is virtually the same size as that, just about 1/4 of an inch bigger, so that it's got a bit of allowance to get the cushion pad in and out. So I've got one of my 2 pieces of fabric here. I'm just going to set out the exact size first and mark that in tailor's chalk, and I will actually cut wider than that in order to give myself a seam allowance. I'm now going to cut around the outside of this, leaving a good allowance in order to make sure that the cushion fits and that we've got enough for the seam. I'm going to use the braid here as a guide so that the allowance I leave is the same depth as the tape, which will actually help me line it up so I can get the edges together and the braid will fit perfectly within the seam then. So that's 3/4 of an inch, and that's what I'm going to leave all the way around the outside. Right, so I'm going to use the piece that I've marked and cut out in order to make an exact copy for the back. So there we have it, we've got our 2 squares of fabric all ready to go. It's actually at this point that I'm going to attach the applique patch onto one of the 2 pieces rather than at the end when the cushion cover is completely finished, because obviously once it's sewn up it's going to be much more difficult to get through the sewing machine, so I'm going to do it on the flat piece of fabric. So for that we're going to need to pop back over to the ironing board to fix the Bondaweb. Okay, we're back here at the ironing board. If you want a bit more detail about using Bondaweb, you can watch the first part of this cushion project video where I give much more detail about using it. But just want to say for now that, as before, we're going to cut it slightly smaller than the full size of this. I don't really want the Bondaweb to run all the way over the edge, so I don't have to worry about trimming it later. It's just to make sure that it's securely held on to the cushion fabric. I'm actually going to sew it as well. Now once again we have to let this cool in order for the glue to completely set, so while I'm doing that I'm going to get the fabric ready. Lovely, so the piece has cooled and I've got here the right side of one of my cushion cover halves. I've picked the one where I've drawn out the line on here just so that I can check that my design is definitely not going to be too close to the edge or anything like that. So not only do I want to leave it away from the seam allowance, but obviously I don't really want it to come close enough to the edge that it would be curving over it either. Thinking about how I wanted this final cushion to look, I didn't particularly want it to be placed right in the very centre. I actually wanted it just placed in the bottom left hand corner, and I'm going to do all of the cushions for the other houses the same when it comes to that. So the full square of my cushion is going to have the badge down here and the plain fabric on the other quarters. So I'm going to peel off the backing of the Bondaweb. It's just the paper sheet that comes with it. And this is now ready to be ironed on, so I'm going to line it up how I like, make sure that I'm happy, and then get ironing. Okay, now I've settled on the position that I want, I am actually going to turn this over so that again I'm ironing from the reverse and I'm not putting the hot iron on the front of my piece. Lovely, that's completely sealed on where the Bondaweb ran in the central section. Okay, so we're back over at the sewing machine, and what I'm going to do now, I'm actually going to stitch very neatly all around the edge of the felt in order to attach it fully onto the fabric. The Bondaweb's just holding it in the centre. Now when I was attaching the cross stitch to the felt, I oversewed the edge of the Ada with a zigzag stitch onto the felt. However, because the felt won't fray, I'm actually just going to use a straight stitch as close to the edge as I possibly can so that it looks nice and neat, and it's fixed on like that. So I've already done some test stitching to get the right length and tension that I want, and I've also threaded up with my blue thread instead of the white like last time. So we're all sewn up here, as you can see, just a neat little oversew edge all the way around, and that's now firmly on the fabric, and we're ready to start pinning up our pieces and assembling the cushion cover. Okay guys, we're here to pin up. We've got our right sides together. I've got a confession to make. This is not the first time today I'm going to be pinning and sewing this cushion up together. A couple of reasons. Firstly, I don't know if you guys noticed in the video earlier when I was measuring, marking and cutting, but one of the sides, the long side, was 16 inches, but the across side was not. It's only 15. You know, as the saying goes, measure twice, cut once. Well, that's definitely something I'm going to remember for the future. Slight change of plan. Basically what I'm going to do, I'm just going to open up the cushion pad and use the wadding from inside to stuff the cushion. Then it can be any size that I like after that. It doesn't have to stay inside a cushion pad. I'll just have to remember my dimensions for the next 3 cushions that I make when I make up the other 4, the other Hogwarts houses, and they'll all be the same then. Also, I had great difficulty with this flange edged braid. Firstly, it was just a nightmare trying to get it to stay in the seams in a nice neat way. It's got quite a strong twist to it, and it was just pulling up the fabric every time that I was trying to do it, especially in the corners. And also when it came to doing it through the machine, I couldn't sew close enough to the braid. So when it was turned right side, you could see a bit of the tape in the gap and nothing. I used the zipper foot, I just couldn't get close enough into that. And faced with the prospect of hand sewing it, I figured I would unpick, start again. I'm going to sew up the cushion without the braid on. I'm going to take the tape off the braid and sew it just like you would normal braid, hand stitch it along the seam. It's also going to cover up where, obviously there's going to be a small section of this which is going to be sewn up at the end, right side to right side, because we've got to turn the cushion the right way out once it's made. And it will cover all that for being sewn on at the end. And then pop the tassels on at the corner. So, bit of gin helped me through my trials and tribulations. It's about 2 hours since I started doing this, but we're going to crack on properly this time. So I'm just going to start pinning these together. What I've done, I've actually trimmed down the 16-inch length to 15, so it is still a square, it's 15 by 15 now. I'm going to pin these together and then start stitching it up on the machine. So we're all stitched around finally. I'm just going to trim straight across the corners, obviously into the seam allowance outside of my stitching, in order to just reduce some of the bulk in the corners so that when it's turned the right way out, it should have some nice crisp square corners in here. I've left a gap here where the badge is in order to turn it the right way out, but I have sewn a bit into the corner at the bottom here and across here as well. Let's just trim these corners. Just left a pin in there. And for the moment of truth, let's turn it the right way out. There we are. It's not quite as dramatic as it would have been had we already had the braid sewn into it. I'm just going to use the closed point on my scissors just gently up inside to completely push out the corners there, and then I'm going to start stuffing it. Right, time for stuffing. I've cut open my cushion case and I'm just shoving all the wadding into this. There is a small amount left in the bottom of this, but I'm not surprised considering this is a 16-inch square cushion and this is only 15. I'm not going to stuff it any further. I don't want it to be, you know, bursting full and uncomfortable. So I'm just going to see to stitching up our little gap. So here we are. This is our finished cushion without the braid or tassels on. If you didn't want to do braid or tassels, you are done. You are completely finished. It's just plain on the back. And on the front, you can just about see where I hand sewed up the gap, but that's going to be covered up by the braid. So next thing for me to do is going to be to take this tape off the edge of the braid, and I'm going to hand sew it all the way around. I'm going to come back and show you when that's done. We're done. I have hand stitched on all the braid around the edges, and I've even put some little loops up around the corners. Basically, instead of just doing a round corner, I have stitched it around in a little loop and then carried it on all the way over to the next one. The only thing left to do now is to pop the tassels on. So these are going to go, they've already got a little loop attachment at the top. These are just going to be fed through the holes in the corners and our tassels done. Okay, so here it is. This is our finished cushion. It's got tassels on the corners, which I just think are the cutest thing ever. Obviously it's got our cross stitch patch applique on it. So I'm just going to take you up quite close. It's stitched around the edge onto the cushion fabric. We've also got the braid, which has been hand stitched all the way around with little curl corners. Same on the back here. I'm going to talk a bit about how the project went. Particularly making the cushion did not go as expected. I have actually made patches before. I in fact collect cloth patches, have done since I was about 10 years old, from when I started off in Girl Guides, and have just collected them ever since. I've got a blanket that's absolutely covered in them, get them from all over the world. So yeah, I already kind of had an idea how I was going to do that with the cross stitch, and that was reasonably straightforward, which is what you saw in part 1. Part 2 did not go so straightforward for a number of reasons. Biggest reason is me, because I mismeasured, gosh, try and say that quickly, and my fabric piece, I cut it just to 15 inches instead of 16 inches, which meant my cushion pad wouldn't fit inside. Instead we cut the cushion pad open and used the wadding from it. Same with the flange edged braid, I couldn't use it as it was. Tried everything to get it to sew into the seams, but with the sewing machine I just could not get close enough, and if I was going to have to hand sew it anyway, I thought I might as well use it to cover up the edge of the stitching, particularly where at the bottom here I had the gap to stuff the cushion. So as it is now, you can't tell that at all, it looks completely the same because it's got the braid over the top. So obviously I had to take the braid apart, and in theory I could have just bought braid that had no flange edge on it anyway. As it was, the haberdashery where I got this from, it had a very limited range in normal braid and loads of flange edge braid, so I wouldn't have got this colour, which I wanted to sort of pick out the colour and the style of the twist in the back of the cross stitch piece. I wouldn't have got it without that anyway, so I'd have had to have bought it and taken it apart. I think as well with these little tassels, although they're cute, they could be a lot bigger. Surely. There's nothing wrong with massive tassels. So again, this is all that my haberdashery store had, but I think if I had a free choice I might get some bigger ones in, but it's just because they're just looped on, so it's going to be the easiest thing. It wouldn't have to take anything apart to change them, so it may well be if I keep my eye out and see something that I think would be suitable, that these tassels might get swapped out. But other than that, I'm absolutely delighted with how it's turned out in the end, and it just goes to show what you can do if you sort of problem solve. Things crop up in all sorts of crafts, more particularly when you've got less control over it, things like woodworking and stuff like that. You know, you don't really know what's going to happen when you start cutting into that piece of wood, but when it comes to this sort of thing, it's nice to know that we can come and make and produce a really good item out of it, even if things do go wrong on the way through. So I'm super pleased with it. I'd be absolutely delighted if my other houses end up being like this. I'm definitely going to make the other cushions to go with. Obviously I'll probably put pictures up on Instagram of that, and they may well be in my floss tube update videos when I finish those cushions. This cushion here is going to feature in that as well. So yeah, thank you very much for joining me for my very first project. Please write down in the comments if you've got any questions at all about how this was made, or any suggestions, your thoughts on it. And I will see you in the next video. It's been lovely talking to you. Bye.